Hello, everyone, and welcome back to our series of learning to code in P5JS. This week, we will be learning a new concept about loops. But before we do that, we will try to unpack a couple of ideas which are related to events and random. So let's begin. All right, so before we get started, I would like you to revisit the code structure that we have here and we have been using in the past few weeks. If you remember, we have something here. We have been working with these three functions, right, at the moment. We have a setup function where something happens only once at the beginning of our program, and then we have a resize function and we have the draw function. Draw function is where all the action happens, right? It's something where all the animations and whatever set of instructions we have put inside continuously run. And then we had something here which is already in case of like an event where this only gets triggered if we resize our window, right? So when we talk about events, it's kind of a similar thing. Events actually let us jump out of the set of instructions within the draw function, and they help in executing certain line of codes or instruction only if something happens or if an event occurs, or think of it like if something gets triggered. So I would like you to see here. Okay, let's go down here. Okay, so there are certain events which are already mentioned in P5 reference library. So if you notice here that we have been already playing around a lot with mouse X and mouse Y position. We have also previously worked with previous mouse X and Y position as well. But there are a few others that we can kind of play around with, and we will try and do them today. So a few of the common ones are here. If you notice these mouseDragged, mousePressed, and mouseRelease function, not just specific to mouse, but there are also some functions which are events, not functions, but functions also events which are related to our keyboard. So we can also use some keyPressed or key-released functions from here as well. Then, of course, there are these acceleration events as well that might be a bit more relevant and helpful if you're designing something for mobile interface, like if you want to insert something within an app or So for now, what we will do today is we are going to work with some mouse events, and then we will also look at some key events related to our keyboard, right? Okay, just make sure that you keep your code organized in a way. Some people like to, draw out a line just so that you can differentiate between different lines of code. I like to just leave, a line just like as a space in between, but whatever works for you, just make sure you do that. Okay, so first of all, let's try to do something that is a bit more common and interesting. So we're going to play around with a mousePressed function. So as the name suggests, what would happen is basically this event will get triggered only when the mouse is actually pressed, right? So whatever set of instructions we're going to put inside this function, they will only be executed once the mouse is pressed. So let's try to create something that we have done before, like a simple, like a circle. And in here, since we have also played around with mouse X and mouse Y position, let's see. Okay, what would happen in this case? So now if you see, as long as, or whenever, not as long as, whenever I am pressing my mouse, a circle is being drawn. And the circle is being drawn at the same position where my cursor is, of course, because of the parameters that we have identified or set in our circle function. Okay, so that is one thing. Maybe we can also think about or maybe I can introduce it now or later. Let's go back here. Or what we can do is, one more thing. So for instance, instead of a pressed function, what if we did mouse dragged? How do you think that this would change? So if I press my mouse and then I keep dragging it, as the name suggests, it's going to keep generating or the circles, because that's the set of instructions I have inside the code. The minute I actually leave it, and now since I'm only moving and my mouse is not pressed, nothing is happening. Now I've pressed my mouse, like I've clicked it once and I keep dragging it, so it's going to keep generating certain kind of like a brush stroke or a tool that we can actually work with. So that's what, there are different kind of mouse events that you can actually always go back and refer to in the reference page in P5. So we're going to today just work with mousePressed and see what all we can kind of work around within this one. Another thing here that maybe before we move forward and we can talk about is, think about it in function for keyPressed, right? So whatever set of codes or instructions are going to be inside this one, they will work. So for instance, if I say background to be white, right? So let's say I keep on clicking. Wherever I click, I am generating these circles, but the minute I press any key, it's going to, for us, it looks like it has cleared up our canvas, right? Now I'm pressing it again. I've pressed any key, it will keep on clearing it up. Why? Because the background is being created only when I press a key. We can also try and be more specific within the keyPress functions as well. So for instance, think about it. Right now I'm pushing any kind of key, right? Look, I can press a space bar, I can press any kind of numbers and it will work. But if I want to go like a bit more specific, there's another way for us to write that down. So what I can say is if key is equals to, let's say B for black. Okay, so what I have done is I've added in a conditional statement, right? And within this conditional statement, I want the background to turn. Okay, let's do W just because it's a white. Okay. What it is doing is that key is already a reserved keyword within the P5 environment that it already understands. And what this is doing is that it is going to check the last key that has been pressed, right? Remember, it will return something as either true or false. So if, and now this is not an assigning sign, this is an equality operator, right? So it's going to check if the last key which is pressed is actually a W, in this case, a small w, then you're going to change the background as white. So for instance, I am now, clicking, I'm pressing my mouse, I've generated a lot of circles. So now if I press my space bar, nothing would happen. Or if I am pressing any other key, nothing would happen unless I press W, right? So now it has become specific to or attached to that key, because only when that condition is met, it's going to perform the task that we have actually put inside. So for instance, I can do that, or since our else, we can generate another one and we say, okay, else make the background as white. Oh, okay, maybe I can change it to black, and then we can see how it's kind of different. I mean, you can literally do anything. It's not something specific. So I have created a lot of circles. Now I press our key, which has turned our canvas black. Now I can't see, of course, because now I can see, right? Now you guys can see it is, again, I'm clicking. There's some slight lag, so don't worry about it. But the minute I press any other key except for that one, my canvas is now white, right? Sounds good? Okay, now it's clicking. I'm clicking too fast. Maybe I should just slow it down, and I'm just gonna, for now, clean it up. All right, so those are a few things. There are more of key functions that you can kind of like look into, and events. I'm just gonna format it before we kind of go back to our mousePressed function. Okay, so that is something around events. Let us try to create here something else. So, you know, we don't have to specifically tie it to our, you know, position of mouse X and mouse Y. Right now, we have specifically asked, right? Before or earlier, if you remember, or maybe this is not a good example. If I would have given any kind of hard numbers, we can actually replace them with variables, right? Mouse X and mouse Y is already a reserved variable that the P5 understands, but we can actually change those values as well and create our own variables so that, you know, we can play around a bit more. So think about it. How can we do that? For instance, if we want to replace mouse X and mouse Y with our own variables, how can we go about it? We can create our own, right? So let's do let X is, and we can decide how we want or what kind of values we want to put in. Just before I do that, I am putting X as the name of the variable just because I will replace it as the X position of the circle. You literally don't have to follow the same naming format. It's just, you know, it just makes it easier for you to remember where you're using it. If you literally change it to a cat or a dog or a mouse or a bottle or a pen, and then you keep on, you know, using the same sort of name wherever you want it to be used, that's perfectly fine too, as long as your code understands it and you understand it and remember. Also, this variable that we are generating is basically a local variable. This is not a global variable that we are generating at this point in time. Okay, so I am going to introduce here this function called random. And why we are creating this is because right now we had only circles being created wherever our mouses or our cursor was. So what if we want to detach it and create or generate circles all around our canvas, regardless of where my mouse is? So, which is why we are going to assign certain value. And here, this function of random is going to be super helpful for us. Why? Because instead of us giving it a certain value or assigning it a certain hard-coded number in our variable, we are basically asking this code to generate a random number for us. And each time you generate that random number, you're going to use it as the X position for our circle. Okay, so that's what we are doing. The interesting thing for random function is that it takes two parameters or two arguments, right? The first one is basically, if you put both, the first one becomes the minimum value and the second one becomes the maximum value. But if you only put one value, that is taken to be as the maximum value. So if, let's say, I say that the X position, which I'm even going to, you know, change here and use it. So what I am telling at this point in time is that you're going to generate, hey computer, or P5, right? You're going to generate some random number between 0 and width, which means whatever the smallest, whatever the maximum size of our width is, right? So between 0 and that value, you are going to generate a number and then use that value as the X position of our circle. I can do the same thing for our Y value as well, right? So we're going to do, for our Y here, we can say, okay, you're going to create this, any random number between 0 and height, and we will replace this here. So what this would do, or what this would start doing is, regardless of wherever my mouse is, it's randomly creating circles all over the canvas because the numbers are being randomly thrown out by the code. Another interesting thing is that something that we had learned in our last few lessons is the print function. So let's say if we want to see what are the kind of values which are being put out as our X position and as our Y position, we are going to try and do that. So let me show you quickly how this is done. And it's a little structure that I will just explain you in a second of why this is like this. And I'm going to comment this out. Okay, so let us go back to our console first for a second. And then see, okay. So let's ignore this one for now. Let me click here. So now if you can see, if I am clicking, it is randomly generating some X position value and some Y value. Of course, this is a float value, which means that this is a decimal point and it is taking up a lot of points. We can clean that up, but for now, we are just going to leave it as it is. So now if you can see this sort of the way it is being printed out here in the console is sort of important. Anything that you put within the quotes, either single or double, is basically your any kind of text, or let's say your English language, which is going to be output exactly the way that you've written. So if you notice that I have not put a space here, and you see that there is no space over here as well, but I can literally do this. And now the next time I'm doing this is become like that. This plus sign is basically used as, it is not going to be something that is shown here, but this is actually showing that, okay, what I have asked in English language is X is whatever the value that you're going, this is all English, plus you're going to attach this X variable value, which is being generated from the computer, right, from our code. And you're going to input that number here, that value here. Plus, which is basically going to the next step, you're going to put a comma because that's what I've put in quotes here. And I've also given space, so we can see the space here. And then I have put another quotes here. I can give a space here. And now this is, I can give another space here and another, sorry, the space here doesn't matter. Within the quotes, it matters because it just writes it as it is. And then I've also added that, okay, after you have put this in English, also attach this Y variable, whatever the value is being generated. So now if you see, this is all it is showing us as well. So in case if you want to also go back and look at, okay, what exactly is it outputting for us, you can always, use the print function and check it in your console. So I'm going to just comment it out and remove it. This was just like something for you to sort of remember. Okay, so right now, if we go back, we have been generating all the circles which are positioned, at different points in our canvas, but they are of the same diameter. We can actually control that too. And how we can do that is, if let's say instead of giving a hard number here as 100, we change this to a variable as well. And since we are having a lot of random ones, we can do that. So maybe we don't want it to be 0 because we might not see it. So let's give it at least I want to see as small as diameter to be 50 and maybe as big as 200. So now this becomes the minimum and this becomes the maximum value. And now I need to replace this hard-coded number with D. It doesn't have to be D. I've just put D as a short form for diameter, but you can literally put any sort of variable as a number. So now some of them are small, some of them are big. As you guys can see, I keep pressing it. The minute I press my key B, it has turned black. I can keep doing the same thing with my cursor. And now I've, used any other key to actually turn the background to white. So this is basically how we can call different events, and we can actually add some sort of like random, give some random values or generate some random values and put them in our code. Another thing is that we have been using a lot of like these black and white. Maybe we can play around a little bit with color. So for instance, if you want to do that, you can literally keep on adding for some sort of variables that we can put in our fill function, right? So since we know that we, by default, our color mode is RGB, right? So red, green, blue. I'm literally going to name it as let R is random. Again, remember, the maximum value in RGB is between 0 to 255. So if I put the highest value as 255, it's going to pick any number between 0 to that. So I'm just going to quickly here copy paste this. And I'm going to change the variable's name to RGB just for my own remembrance. And I'm going to use it here as our values that we have been previously. We have been hard coding these numbers, right? But we, like, you know, think of it like even in background, we have been hard coding these numbers. Here we have just turned them into variables, which are being generated by our code. So let's see what happens in this case. Now, when I start pressing, or maybe I can also do a no stroke here. Okay. So if now I actually press anywhere on my canvas, I can see that these are being randomly colored. We can have some more interesting control in terms of the kind of colors that we want to generate, or the range of colors. So this is one thing, you know, RGB value takes up, you know, we can see some bright colors, we can see some light, some of them which are deep. We can also change our color mode. So for instance, we have been using the default one, which is RGB. But there's another one which is called HSB. So HSB stands for hue, saturation, and brightness. And if we want to change our color mode, we can just do it once in our setup function, because we don't have to keep doing it again and again. All right, so here this is basically hue, saturation, and brightness. Some of you might already be familiar with this concept, but just saying, hue stands for basically any of the color which is on the color wheel. So think about that circle, your color wheel, and where that color might be. Saturation just controls how high or less saturated it's going to be, and the brightness, of course, is going to look for brightness. The thing is that here, for RGB, when we are looking at it, all of them have a range from 0 to 255, and that goes for red, green, blue. And even if you add opacity to it later, do that too. But the hue, saturation, brightness works slightly differently. So I'm going to put this here for now, and I'm going to comment this out because we are not using this. What if when we are using this HSB mode and we want to pick a random color? So maybe what we can do here is let hue is, again, we're going to use our random function, and within this we are going to give a certain value. The max value for hue is 360. And why is that so? Because think of your color wheel, because it's a full circle, right? So the minimum value is starting from 0, and your maxed out value is going to be 360 degrees. So it's kind of like that. So think of it in those lines. And then here we can literally use our fill function, and we can call this here, because remember, we are doing HSB. So our first argument was hue, second and third are going to represent saturation and brightness. We are not playing around with more random values here. So if we keep it at maxed out for saturation and brightness, so the maximum for saturation brightness is 100. So that's what it is representing. So what we are just saying here is that pick any color on the color wheel, and then just make sure that the brightness and the saturation is at its highest. So if we do that, and now let's see, when we start pressing our cursor, we can see a lot of really bright, happy colors being generated in terms of like the circle here, right? You can also control the opacity of it. So if you remember the fourth argument, which is generally an optional one, you can control how transparent you want that to be. If you remember, the opacity for RGB mode is still between 0 to 255, and that's how you can control it with between the most and the least opaque one. But in the fill function, it kind of works between 0 to 1. So that means think of it like a percentage, where 1 is the maxed out and 0 is the least. So if, let's say, I go for a 50%, I can literally say 0.5. So what I'm saying is that whatever color that you're picking here or you're generating, make sure that the brightness and saturation is maxed out, but the opacity is 50%. So now if you see, and I'm clicking here, we can see some partially transparent circles being generated, right? we can actually make it this, and then we can try it in our, once we've pressed P, of course, the background has been changed to black. If I press any other key, it's kind of again back to white. All right, so this is all our about our some random and events. Oh, one more thing, and that's kind of just something that I remember. This, when we put in quote any kind of like key, this is case sensitive. So let's say if you wanted to make sure that it's not only small b but also capital B, remember we can add some logical operators with or. So we can say if key is either a small b or it's a capital B, either way you're going to turn it black. So let's say if I press the shift or a caps lock on thing, it's going to generate that too. All right, so this is just something going back to what I would like you to do for this one. Try and explore some other key and mouse events which are available and see how they turn out to be. If you notice, once you actually, in fact, even on Glitch, if you remix your project and the time it takes to load your page, if your canvas is open and if you move your mouse around, you will see some sort of animation happening. So now that you've learned this, I would like you to check if you can figure out what sort of line of codes are written there for you to achieve that sort of effect. So I'll see you in the next lesson.